Black Ops 6 is a first-person shooter that continues the series' tradition of high-energy action, featuring an exciting campaign and a competitive multiplayer mode. The gunplay is as satisfying as ever, and the graphics are top-notch, really bringing the battlefield to life. The campaign has some great set pieces, but the story doesn't really stand out and feels kind of predictable. Multiplayer is fun with a good mix of maps and weapons, but I did feel like it plays it a bit safe without introducing anything too new. Even with these issues, it's a solid shooter that fans of the series will enjoy. It's one of those games that's easy to pick up but hard to put down.
Watch out! On it!
Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is an action-packed fighting game that takes you right into the explosive battles of the Dragon Ball universe with incredible visuals, fast-paced combat, and a massive roster of characters. And what's really fun is how you can pull off all those flashy special moves and transformations just like in the anime. But while the battles are intense and the destructible environments look great, the controls can feel a bit clunky at times, especially when trying to pull off complex combos. And the story mode feels a bit too familiar if you've played other Dragon Ball games, but if you're a fan of the series, you're definitely going to have a blast with this one.
Get some! Get some!
Helldivers 2 is a co-op tactical shooter that challenges you and your friends to survive intense battles against alien enemies on different planets. The game's strategic elements, like managing friendly fire and coordinating attacks, really make it stand out. The chaotic combat and emphasis on teamwork are great. Though I did find some of the missions to be a bit too similar, and the difficulty could be quite punishing at times. Even with these issues, it's still a fun game if you're into cooperative shooters that require good communication and strategy. It's the type of game that feels incredibly rewarding when you finally beat a tough mission. Nine Sols is an action platformer set in a world inspired by Asian mythology, and right from the start, the hand-drawn visuals pulled me in with how beautiful and detailed everything looks. The combat is really fun with its mix of sword fighting and deflecting enemy attacks that feel super satisfying when timed right. Although some of the platforming sections can be pretty frustrating because they need really precise jumps. And while the story is interesting and adds a lot of depth to the game, it does feel a bit slow in some parts. But overall, if you're into challenging combat and a unique, beautiful world, this game is definitely worth checking out. I played No Man's Sky a few years ago when it first came out, and honestly, it was a bit rough. But I decided to give it another go recently, and wow, has it changed. Exploring these vast alien worlds is just incredible. There's so much to see and discover. Flying your spaceship from planet to planet, finding new resources and weird creatures is seriously addictive. They've added so much stuff too, like base building and freighters and all sorts of things to do. It feels like a completely different game, but it's still got some of its old quirks. Sometimes the game can feel a little repetitive, just flying around scanning stuff. And I did run into a couple of little bugs here and there. Even with those small issues though, I'm having a blast with this game. It's a huge game with tons of content, and if you're looking for a chill space exploration game, you should definitely check it out, especially now since it's so much better than it used to be. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is this gorgeous Metroidvania game where you play as Ori, a little spirit who has to save his forest and his friends. It's a really beautiful game. The visuals are stunning, and the world is so full of life. The platforming is incredibly smooth and responsive. You feel so fluid as you're jumping and dashing around. I loved exploring the different areas. Each one is unique and has its own challenges. The combat is also really fun. There are lots of different abilities you can unlock and upgrade. It can be a bit challenging at times. Some of the boss fights are pretty tough, but it's never unfair. Honestly, it's hard to find anything I didn't like about this game. Maybe if I had to nitpick, I'd say the story is a little bit simple, but it's still very heartfelt. Overall, it's a fantastic game. It's a must-play for any fan of Metroidvanias or platformers. Pentiment is a really unique game where you play as an artist in 16th century Bavaria and you get to investigate a murder. It's not your typical murder mystery, though it's more about the characters and their lives, and the choices you make really impact the story and how it unfolds. I loved the art style. It looks like an illuminated manuscript, and it gives the game this really distinctive look. The writing is excellent too. The dialogue feels very natural, and the characters are all well developed. It's not a fast-paced action game. It's more about talking to people, exploring the town, and piecing together clues. Honestly, I don't really have any major complaints. It's a very well-crafted game. Maybe if I had to say something negative, it's that it's not for everyone. If you're looking for a lot of action, this might not be your cup of tea. But if you enjoy story-driven games with interesting characters and meaningful choices, then I highly recommend it. It's definitely a game that makes you think. So I finally got around to playing Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown last month, and honestly, this game surprised me with how good it is. The combat is super smooth and satisfying, like you really feel every hit, and the platforming is so much fun. Zipping around the world feels great. Exploring the different areas is a treat. They're all so well designed, and the story, while not groundbreaking, is actually pretty engaging. I found myself wanting to know what happened next. Although the game is not perfect, I did run into a few minor glitches here and there. Nothing game-breaking, but a little annoying, and the boss fights, while cool, could be a bit repetitive sometimes. But overall, this game is a fantastic experience. If you're looking for a fun action-adventure game with great combat and exploration, you should definitely check it out. Red Dead Redemption 2 remains one of the most immersive and engaging open-world experiences I've ever had. The world is just incredible, so detailed and alive, and exploring it feels like a real adventure. The story is fantastic too, with well-developed characters and a really compelling narrative. I got completely lost in Arthur Morgan's journey, and I cared about what happened to him and the rest of the gang. It's a very long game though, so it can take a while to finish, and some of the missions can feel a bit repetitive. Also, the online mode wasn't as engaging as I hoped, but even with those small issues, this game is a masterpiece. If you're looking for a truly immersive and unforgettable open-world game, you absolutely have to play it. Rise of the Ronin drops you into a really vibrant historical Japan, and it's a huge open-world action experience. The combat is just fantastic. You can switch between different sword styles so easily, and it looks amazing. Though the story can feel a bit cluttered, like it's trying to cram too much in. Exploring the world is a blast, but some of the side quests are a bit repetitive. Still, when you're in a big fight and you're pulling off those awesome sword moves, that's where the game really shines. Honestly, if you love samurai action, this game is definitely worth checking out. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin is this really cool mix of action, platforming, and farming. You play as Sakuna, a spoiled harvest goddess who gets banished to a dangerous island and has to learn to cultivate rice and fight monsters. The combat is surprisingly deep. There's a lot of different combos and skills to learn, and it feels really satisfying to take down enemies. But the farming aspect is just as important. You have to carefully manage your rice paddies to grow the best possible rice, and that rice actually makes Sakuna stronger, so it's all connected. I loved the art style. It's really vibrant and colorful, and the characters are all charming. It can be a bit grindy at times. You do spend a lot of time tending to your rice, and some of the combat challenges can be tough. But overall, it's a really unique and enjoyable game. If you like action games with a bit of a twist, or if you've ever wanted to try virtual rice farming, then I definitely recommend checking it out. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 is a dark and intense action game where you play as Senua, a warrior who's battling her own mental health struggles while fighting to save her people. It's a really immersive experience, and the visuals are absolutely stunning. They're so realistic and detailed. The combat is brutal and visceral. It feels very weighty and impactful. I love the way they incorporated Senua's mental state into the gameplay. The voices in her head and the visual hallucinations really add to the atmosphere.
Please help!
It's a very emotional game and it deals with some heavy themes. If I had to mention anything negative, it's that the game can be quite short and some might find the combat a little repetitive. But overall, it's a powerful and unforgettable experience. It's a game that stays with you long after you've finished it. Space Marine 2 is all about brutal third-person combat where you play as a space marine fighting hordes of Tyranids. It's a non-stop action game and it really captures that feeling of being an unstoppable force of nature. The combat is visceral and satisfying. You can chain together melee attacks and ranged weapons, and it all feels really impactful. I loved the variety of weapons and abilities. There's a lot of different ways to customize your playstyle. The game looks great too, the graphics are really impressive, and the environments are detailed. It can get a little repetitive at times. You are fighting a lot of the same enemies over and over again, and sometimes the story missions can feel a little bit linear. But if you're looking for a game where you can just unleash a ton of firepower and smash some bugs, then you'll probably have a good time with this one. It's definitely a fun and action-packed experience.
Fiskmen have fled through the building. Eliminate them.
So I finally got my hands on Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and let me tell you, this game is amazing. Swinging through New York City feels so good. It's smooth and fast and just so much fun. The combat is even better than before with new moves and gadgets that make every fight exciting. Playing as both Peter and Miles is really cool too. They both have their own unique abilities and storylines. The story itself is really engaging with some great moments and some surprising twists.
Is that a Higgs field? That's actually really cool.
It's not perfect though. I did notice a few small graphical glitches here and there, and sometimes the open world can feel a little overwhelming with so much to do. Also, while the story is great, some of the side missions are a bit repetitive. But honestly, even with those little issues, this game is fantastic. If you're a Spider-Man fan or just love superhero games, you absolutely have to play it. Stalker 2 is this gritty survival game where you explore the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and it's a pretty intense experience. It's an open world and it's full of dangers from mutated creatures to rival factions, and the atmosphere is just incredible. It's so creepy and immersive. I loved exploring the zone, discovering hidden stashes and uncovering the secrets of what happened there. The shooting mechanics are solid, and the survival elements, like managing your resources, add a lot to the tension. It can be a tough game though. The zone is a dangerous place and you'll die a lot. And sometimes the game can be a bit buggy. But if you're looking for a challenging and atmospheric survival game, then I definitely recommend it. It's a really unique experience.
Onward and upward.
So I finally got around to playing Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and honestly, it was such a fun surprise. I mean, I knew it would be good, but it was even better than I expected. The way they've mixed up the classic Mario formula with these crazy new Wonder Flowers is brilliant. Some of the level transformations are just wild, and the new badges add a whole other layer of fun.
That Goomba looks so sweet. Well then.
You can turn into a Goomba or even have your character float around. It's just silly and addictive. The levels themselves are beautifully designed too. They're bright and colorful and full of secrets. Some are easy peasy, but others will really test your platforming skills, and the boss fights are pretty cool though. I did wish there were a few more unique ones, but overall this game is just pure, unadulterated fun. It's perfect for playing with friends or family, and it's one of those games that just makes you happy. So if you're looking for a game that's guaranteed to put a smile on your face, you should definitely give this one a try. Unravel is this beautiful puzzle platformer where you play as Yarny, a little creature made of yarn who's on a journey to reconnect with lost memories. It's a really emotional game, and the visuals are absolutely stunning. They're so detailed and vibrant. The gameplay is pretty clever too. You use Yarny's yarn to solve puzzles and swing across gaps. It's a really unique mechanic. I loved exploring the different environments. Each one feels so distinct and tells its own little story. The puzzles are generally well designed. Some can be a little tricky, but they're never too frustrating. If I had to nitpick, I'd say the story is a little bit vague. At times, it could have been nice to have a bit more context. But overall, it's a really charming and heartfelt game. If you're looking for a relaxing puzzle platformer with gorgeous visuals and a touching story, then I definitely recommend giving it a try. I played The Witcher 3 a few years back, and even now it's easily one of the best open-world games I've ever touched. The world is just massive and gorgeous. I mean, you can literally get lost for hours just exploring and discovering hidden little spots. And the side quests are actually really well done. They're not just boring fetch quests, which is a breath of fresh air. Combat takes a bit to get used to. It can be a little clunky at first, but once you figure it out, it's actually pretty satisfying. But the real star of the show is the story. It's so well written, and the characters are so well developed, you actually feel like you know them. And with the recent next-gen patch, it looks even better now. The visuals are sharper, and the performance is smoother, making the whole experience even more immersive. Overall, this game is a masterpiece. It's definitely a must-play, and I can totally see myself going back to it again someday.
Time to wake up, Nightingale.
Withering Rooms is a horror adventure game that puts you in a terrifying, ever-changing mansion where you need to solve puzzles and avoid creepy creatures to survive. And I really enjoyed how the game creates this intense, spooky atmosphere with its eerie visuals and haunting sound design, but the controls can feel a bit stiff at times, especially when you're trying to escape from enemies. And while the story is mysterious and keeps you curious, it can be a bit confusing to follow at certain points. But if you're a fan of creepy atmospheric games, this one is definitely worth a playthrough. I played Zelda Breath of the Wild a while back now, and it still remains one of my absolute favorite open-world games. Exploring Hyrule is just magical. There's so much to discover, and every corner feels like it holds a secret. The freedom you have in this game is amazing. You can climb almost anything and approach challenges in so many different ways. The combat is fun too, and learning all the different techniques is really satisfying. It's not perfect though. The story is a little thin and some of the shrines can be a bit repetitive. Also, the weapon durability system can be a little annoying. But even with those small issues, this game is a masterpiece. If you haven't played it yet, you absolutely should, especially if you love open world games or just a good adventure.